Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Good Lawyers Gone Bad podcast. My name is Stuart Teicher. Today's story is actually a longer version of a story that I told in one of my recent CLE programs. For those of you who don't know, I make my living by teaching continuing legal education programs to lawyers. So if you're in a law firm or working on a program at a bar association, or you're looking for a keynote speaker for a lawyer event, feel free to reach out. You can find my course list on my website, stuartteicher.com. I teach ethics, legal writing, and what I call the specialty courses, like substance abuse and mental health, elimination of bias, access to justice, and also the new cybersecurity or technology credits that a lot of states now require. You can message me for more information by going to either my speaking website, stuartteicher.com, or the website for this podcast, goodlawyersgonebad.com. Just go to the contact page on either site, fill out the form, and the message will be sent to my email. Thanks very much for listening, everybody, and enjoy today's episode. Selling Juvenile Justice. Eric was a 12-year-old boy who lived near Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, and he had, shall we say, a glint in his eye. You want to call him precocious? That might be right. Or maybe you'd just say that he's curious. That would probably be true too. But whatever adjective you use, there was one thing you could say for sure about Eric, and that was, he was about to make some trouble. Eric tiptoed into the kitchen and searched the room. His mother's pocketbook had to be somewhere. Was it on the chair where she usually leaves it? Was it on the counter or near the desk? And then, boom, pay dirt. Eric grabbed the purse excitedly, turned it over, and dumped the contents on the counter. He rummaged through everything, mints, telephone, money. But then Eric found what he was looking for. The car keys. Eric ran outside to his mother's car, the keys clutched in his hand. He fumbled with the key ring, searching for the right one to open the door. Then he hopped into the driver's seat. At 12 years old, he was tall enough so that the seat didn't need any adjusting and he could reach the pedals with no problem. Eric threw the car into reverse and drove down the driveway. When he got to the street, he stomped on the brake with the rough touch of an inexperienced driver, and it jostled him in the driver's seat just a bit. Eric was harried, but he was committed. He put the car in drive and pressed on the gas. Amazingly, he straightened the car out and headed down the road. After a few hundred feet, he probably thought, this actually isn't that hard. And it wasn't hard, as long as he was going straight. When Eric needed to turn, however, that changed. Eric took the turn a little bit too quickly and lost control. The car jerked to the side and Eric panicked, causing him to press down further on the gas. Eric tried to correct the direction of the car, but he only succeeded in directing it straight towards the curb. The front wheels of the car hit the curb so hard that the car lifted off the ground a bit and then slammed back down to the ground. Eric heard something break underneath the car when it landed. But at least the car wasn't moving anymore. It was perched awkwardly on the tall curb, the rear half of the car still in the street, and the front half dug into the grassy apron near the sidewalk. When Eric's mother found out what happened, she was livid. But she was also probably somewhat relieved. After all, at least no one got hurt. Could you imagine what a disaster it would have been if that car hopped the curb and crashed into somebody's house? Or hit a person walking on the sidewalk? Lucky for Eric, the quick joyride he took with his mother's car was just that. Quick and painless. I mean, except for that busted up car, of course. And while Eric's mother must have been relieved that no one was hurt, she was surely pissed about having to fix her car. The undercarriage was all busted up and she didn't have the money for the repairs. So Eric's mother made a claim with her insurance company. But the insurance company was giving her a hard time. They asked, "Did you fill out a police report?" "Well, no," Eric's mother said. It didn't seem like there was any reason to get the police involved. My car was the only thing damaged. There was no other property damage at all, and no one was hurt. The insurance company rep told her, "Well, that doesn't matter. We need a police report in order to proceed with a claim." So Eric's mom went downtown and filed a report. And that was a mistake. It seems that the police report triggered an investigation of sorts, and when the cops learned that Eric was all of 12 years old when he went on his solo mission, they charged him with a juvenile violation. Eric got a court date, and he went to the courthouse with his mother. And that was the entire entourage, Eric and his mother, no lawyer. Why? Well, she didn't have money to fix the car, so she surely didn't have money for a lawyer. But let's face it, was it really necessary? Eric had never been in trouble with the law in the past. He was only 12 years old, and it was a first offense. Nobody was hurt, not a lot of property damage. The worst that anyone in that situation expects is a slap on the wrist. Eric and his mother sat in the gallery waiting for the court to call his case. If he's anything like other 12-year-old boys, he was probably bobbing his knee up and down nervously. When his case was called, he walked forward and stood at the counsel table by himself. The judge made a few very quick, curt preliminary remarks, and then he looked at Eric and asked, "How do you plead?" Eric stood before the judge, clasping his hands in front of his stomach, confused. He didn't know what to say. "How do you plead?" the judge asked again impatiently. Eric turned and looked over his shoulder at his mother. He wasn't sure what to do. The two of them shrugged at one another. Eric turned back to the judge and thought to himself, well, I did what I did, so I guess I'm guilty. Eric looked up at the judge and said, "Guilty." The judge, still looking at his papers, said, "Guilty, okay." And that is when two sheriff's officers approached Eric, shackled his hands behind his back, and led him off to jail. Eric's mother watched in horror. The entire court appearance took less than 3 minutes. Joelle was a cheerleader. She generally behaved herself and got good grades, but like a lot of teenagers, she wanted stuff, like, cool clothes. But instead of getting a part-time job or asking her parents to buy her things, Joelle made a stupid mistake. She stole her grandfather's credit card and ran up a bill of a few $1,000s. Eventually, Joelle got caught and found herself in juvenile court. When Joelle stood before the judge, he looked at her and said, "Have you ever disrespected your grandfather?" Joelle's grandfather was standing right next to her. She looked into his eyes. They both knew the truth. At that moment, Joelle must have thought, it's time for me to be honest. Maybe telling the truth today will be the first step in healing. So Joelle admitted to the court that yes, she had disrespected her grandfather. The judge looked at her and said, "You are remanded into custody." Sheriff's officers immediately walked her out of court, handcuffed her, placed shackles on her legs, and put her in a holding cell. They then purposefully walked her grandfather by the cell as he left. Joelle watched him walk by, crying. If Eric and Joelle had been sent to a detention center a few years earlier, they would have been sent to the North River Street Detention Center, a state-run facility in Luzerne County, Pennsylvania. But that facility had closed a short while ago. It was replaced with a privately owned facility that contracted with the county to hold its juvenile violators. Yes, a privately owned institution. And you might not realize that the idea of prisons for profit is not nearly a new thing in this country. In 1849, a three-masted ship called the Waban left New York Harbor. It was heading to San Francisco in search of the same thing everyone was looking for in California those days: gold. 200 days of brutal sailing lay ahead. There was no Panama Canal yet, which meant that the vessel had to head south, go all the way around Cape Horn at the very bottom of South America, and then up through the Pacific Ocean to Northern California. When the ship got to the harbor, the sailors did what every sailor did when they got there. They jumped ship, rushed out to look for gold, and left their boat abandoned in the harbor. And that is where the Waban stayed, bobbing up and down in the San Francisco harbor among the hundreds of other ships whose crews had left for the gold fields. But the Waban would not stay there long. California had only recently become a state, and the new state was dealing with a serious problem: criminals. It wasn't so much the crime that was on the agenda at the time, it was what to do with those criminals. You see, California didn't have a jail. But San Francisco's sheriff looked out on the harbor and saw an opportunity. a business opportunity. The sheriff bought the Waban and turned the boat into a prison ship. And then he made a deal with California. He would start a company, and his company would house the criminals on the Waban, and he would lease those men back to the state as unpaid labor. The state thought it was a great idea, and they were in. The sheriff's foray into the business world, however, would not last long. A month after the sheriff and his partners took command of the Waban, a bunch of the prisoners locked up their guards, took their weapons, commandeered the boat, and took off. The sheriff eventually got the boat back, but 7 convicts got away, and the fiasco turned his business into a losing proposition. Both the sheriff and the state realized that the arrangement was not viable, so they let the sheriff out of his contract, and the state of California decided to build their own prison. In 1852, California purchased 20 acres of land for that purpose on a stretch of land called Point Quentin. The Waban was towed to an area where the jail was being built, and the convicts stayed on the vessel while they worked on the structure that would soon be known as the San Quentin Prison. To honor their first prison, the state of California saved parts of the Waban. Some of the ship's timber was used as part of the hospital's structure on the prison grounds. And when the jail tore down parts of the building during renovations in 2007, the timber from the Waban was moved to the atrium that sits atop the building today. But the legacy of the Waban was not just about the creation of one of the most famous prisons in the country. It was actually the start of something much bigger, a business practice that still exists in the United States today. The Waban was one of the country's first for-profit prisons. The first modern private prison was opened in Tennessee in 1984. The concept was a smashing success, mostly because of the massive increase in the prison population during the U.S. war on drugs. Well, of course, whether you call it a success is subjective. The states liked it. It saved them money, and it alleviated the overcrowding problem that they had in their prisons. The prisoners? Well, they weren't so keen on it. What with the whole issue of human rights abuses and prisoner mistreatment in some facilities. The private prison system started to struggle in the 2000s when prison populations began shrinking. Not to worry, though. During the Obama administration, the private prison companies pivoted. They switched from operating prisons to acquiring contracts to run immigration detention centers. Whenever I'm in a bakery, I look in the refrigerated display cases. Now, that sounds sort of elementary, I know. I mean, everybody looks in the display cases when they walk into a bakery. You want to get a look at the goodies you can buy. But I don't look at the pastries and the cupcakes in that case. I look at the manufacturer's label affixed to the case itself. I want to know if it was made by the Regal Display Case Company. I think I told you about my first job in another podcast episode. It was actually a summer job where I went to work for a local lawyer in South Jersey who was in a firm with his son and his daughter-in-law. It was a whole fiasco. But what I always found fascinating is how the patriarch of that family and the law practice had a variety of other things that he did. He wasn't just a lawyer. He was also an accomplished author and playwright. And in addition to having a successful law practice, he was also a successful business person. One of the businesses he owned was the Regal Display Case Company. They made those refrigerated display cases you see in coffee shops and candy stores. They manufactured them in a warehouse right there in South Jersey and shipped them all over the country. To this day, if you go into a privately owned coffee shop or a chocolate shop or a bakery, you'll probably see the gold and black label that has the word Regal in an italic font. And it's something that's always amazed me. So many lawyers are not happy to just be lawyers. They need to be business people as well. And that was true about Justin Collins. Justin Collins was a lawyer in northeastern Pennsylvania. The guy had a massively successful practice. He obtained multi-million-dollar verdicts in a host of different kinds of cases, including medical malpractice cases, nursing home negligence, automobile crashes, and products liability. He was so wealthy that he owned a yacht that he named Real Justice. Like a fishing reel, you know, R-E-E-L, a play on words, Real Justice. He also had a 12-seat private jet and a 7,100 square foot home. A former college basketball player, Justin Collins knew how to play the game of politics as well. Collins got himself appointed as a lawyer for the County Planning Commission. At one point, he was a city attorney, and he even served as bond counsel for a local school district that was raising money for a construction project. Maybe it was the work on behalf of that last client that gave Collins the idea to expand his own career into the world of construction. Or maybe it was a conversation he had with a man from his community. Collins said that he was moved when the father of a local boy in his community told him about his worries. Apparently, the man's son got into a little bit of trouble, and he might be thrown into juvenile detention. The father was worried that he would be sent to the aging North River Street Detention Center in Luzerne County. It seems that the county-run facility had a bit of a reputation for not being the most pleasant place for juveniles who were detained. Well, Collins said he was moved so much that he decided to build a new facility. So he and a business partner bought a local building and set out to redevelop it into a place they called Pennsylvania Child Care, a new, for-profit juvenile detention facility. Now, building and operating a for-profit juvenile detention facility sounds like a good business move, especially when you consider the success that private industry had been having in the for-profit prison sector. Of course, juvenile detention centers aren't technically prisons, but to a teenager locked up in one, it might as well be. It's certainly in the same family of facilities. Now, in this case, the lawyer/prison builder Justin Collins had a bit of a problem. He wanted to build a new facility, but Luzerne County already had that other juvenile detention center. So how do you make a private jail profitable if there's already a government-owned and government-run facility? Well, that's easy. You eliminate the competition. Just close the county-run facility. But that seems kind of tough, don't you think? I mean, don't you need legislation or something to shut down a major facility like a juvenile detention center? Well, sure. One way to do that is through an act of government. But another way to do it is through the act of someone within the government. You could just find someone in the right position inside the government and then get them to starve the facility. Starve it of funding. If you take away all of its funding, you starve it of its operating capital, and you cut off its lifeline. Then it dies, and a privately run facility will suddenly appear to be the best and maybe even only option. Luckily, Justin Collins had two things that he needed. As a longtime politically connected lawyer, he had relationships with some powerful people in local government, and he also partnered with a deep-pocketed real estate developer who was going to build his new facility. They would both be necessary parts of this puzzle. According to legal documents, Collins was soon the beneficiary of some favorable judicial rulings that set the stage for the county to approve the development of his Pennsylvania Child Care facility. The president judge of the local court of common pleas, yes, that's the title for the head of the county court of that part of Pennsylvania, the president judge. The president judge made a decision that apparently removed funding from the North River Street detention facility. And with no operating funds, there could be no operations. And to put a nail into the coffin of that facility, the judge announced that he would not be sending any more juveniles to the North River Street facility. Oh, I probably should have mentioned that the judge who did that, Judge Conahan, happened to be a friend of our lawyer/prison developer, Justin Collins. That sort of help from a friend is very valuable, but it doesn't come cheap. And that's why Collins' second contact was equally important in putting together this development deal. Collins contracted with a local successful real estate developer, Richard Brighton, to build the Pennsylvania Child Care facility. Brighton was a guy with deep pockets and a deep desire to make sure the project got built. That's probably why he was amenable to listening to his business associate when Collins approached Brighton and told him that they needed to grease some wheels. Collins probably said something like, "Richard, I need your help." "What kind of help?" Brighton probably asked, although he surely already knew the answer. "We're going to have an added expense to this project, and I need you to help me find the money for it." An added expense? Brighton wasn't happy. For what, he probably asked, and how much? "We need to pay, let's call it a finder's fee." "Okay," Brighton surely said. "Who is this finder's fee for, and how much is it?" The finder's fee will be for a couple of people in the government who are going to make sure that our project is a success. You pay it to me, and I'll get it to them." That's when Brighton must have asked, "Who is them, and how much are we talking about?" "They," Collins replied, "are my government contacts, two judges named Michael Conahan and his colleague, Michael Chiavarella." When Brighton heard who the government contact was, he must have raised an eyebrow. Pennsylvania is a big state, but Luzerne County is a tight-knit community. Judge Chiavarella was a close friend of the developer Richard Brighton. And he probably raised his other eyebrow when he realized the reality. Brighton wasn't likely in a position to ask too many questions about whether he should pay this fee. He had a project to build, and if a finder's fee was necessary, then so be it. After all, commissions and consultant fees are paid all the time by developers. But there was still one unanswered question. How much is this finder's fee? Collins smirked. $1 million. The finder's fee was money well spent. After the judge's ruling, Justin Collins got a $58 million contract from the county to build his facility, along with a 20-year lease deal on the building that would be renovated. But getting the place built was only half the battle. He had to run it, too. And a for-profit facility needs to make, well, a profit. The county didn't have to worry about that when they were running their juvie center. When the county runs a juvenile detention facility, they use tax dollars to fund the operation. But when a private company runs a juvenile detention center, they need revenue to fund the operations. But where do you get that revenue? They get it from a contract with the state. In this case, Luzerne County made a deal to pay Justin Collins' company $300 a day for each bed that was filled at the Pennsylvania Child Care Detention Facility. So, all Collins had to do was fill all the beds, and he'd have a pretty good business. But getting those customers, the ones who fill the beds, they're customers, right? Getting customers for a juvenile jail is a little tricky. Think about it. For your business model to be successful, you need kids to commit crimes. But you can't act like a normal business. You can't use standard marketing tactics. What are you going to do? Put up a billboard on the interstate saying, "Hey kids, go steal cars." Have you mugged an old lady today? Oh, maybe got drugs? Well, the solution presented itself to our lawyer/prison builder, Justin Collins. The only question was who proposed that solution. The answer? It depends on who you believe. Justin Collins says that the solution was proposed by someone else and forced upon him. Collins said that the lawyer/prison builder received a message shortly after the Pennsylvania Child Care Facility was opened. He was being summoned to a meeting at the courthouse. When he arrived, he was greeted by Judge Conahan and his colleague, Judge Chiavarella. After some chit-chat, Judge Chiavarella got down to business. He told Collins that he knew the detention center was making money, and it was now time for him and Judge Conahan to get paid. Collins says he was shocked. He had given these guys $1 million as a finder's fee just a little while ago. Collins looked at the judge bewildered. He said, "Are you telling me you guys blew through $1 million already?" The judges laughed. And then Judge Chiavarella sat up and looked into Collins' eyes. He said, "I know what's going on up there, and I want a part of it." Collins claims that he could read the handwriting on the wall. If he wouldn't agree to pay the judges, he knew that they'd never submit another juvenile to his facility, and that would be a financial death knell to his entire business. Collins couldn't afford that, not just for obvious reasons, but also he'd personally guaranteed a $12 million mortgage to build and operate the Pennsylvania Child Care Facility. So the judges proposed a plan for how it was going to work. Collins says he didn't like it, but he felt like he had no choice but to go along. And then they devised a scheme that would get each of them what they wanted. It would get the judges paid handsomely, and it would get a host of new customers for Collins' business. Everyone would be happy. Well, not quite everyone. Marcia Levick was used to dealing with frantic parents. Marcia was the chief legal officer of the Philadelphia-based Juvenile Law Center, a juvenile rights advocacy group. She'd seen all sorts of cases, so she had plenty of experience with parents who called her in a tizzy. But this call she recently got, this one had her concerned. This time, something sounded different. Maybe it was the tone in the mother's voice. Maybe it was the incredible story she was telling. Well, whatever the reason, Marcia seems to have listened to this story intently, and the tale she heard was incredible. What was the stupidest thing you did in high school? The stupidest thing I did was hide in the tire playground of a local elementary school. Did you have tire playgrounds by you? I hid in the tire playground of the local elementary school with my friend Joe Apaldo, and we smoked cigarettes. It was dumb, but what made it stupider was putting my cigarettes in my pants pocket where my mother would eventually find them. Fast forward 30 years and one of my sons did the exact same thing. I yelled at him and never told him that I had done it too. Oh, there's no chance he's ever going to find out because he doesn't listen to my podcast. Anyway, neither one of us were very smart. High school student Hillary Transu did something worse. I mean, that's what some people think, but honestly, I don't think what she did was so terrible. Hillary Transu was a student at Crestwood High School in Wright Township, Pennsylvania. She and several classmates really did not like their vice principal. Actually, I can't be sure that they didn't like her. I mean, they were just stupid high school kids. Well, to show their displeasure with this authority figure, Hillary and her friends decided to mock their vice principal. So what did a bunch of 15-year-old high school kids do if they wanted to bust on someone in 2007? They went to the OG social networking site MySpace. 15-year-old Hillary Transu created a page on MySpace mocking the vice principal. The page included devious statements like, "Wouldn't it be funny if the vice principal admitted that she dreams about Johnny Depp wearing tighty-whitey underwear?" Really rough stuff, huh? Well, school officials didn't find it funny, and they called the cops. Hillary Transu had harassment charges filed against her, and she was called into court. Hillary's mother wasn't too concerned. Laureen Transu used to be a social worker, so she was familiar with juvenile court proceedings. Everybody knew that something as serious as detention was reserved only for the harshest of situations, not for when some kid makes a cheeky comment on a social media page. The arresting officer even assured Laureen that Hillary would probably get probation and community service. Laureen went to court with her daughter, and they sat in the hallway waiting to be called. When their name was finally announced, the pair thought that they were being escorted to the public defender's office to talk about the case. Instead, they were ushered into the courtroom. Before she knew it, Hillary Transu found herself standing in front of Judge Chiavarella. And before she could utter a word, the judge slammed his hand down on his desk and shouted at her, "What makes you think you can get away with this crap?" 60 seconds later, Hillary was escorted away in handcuffs. Her mother, Laureen, shrieked. She shouted. She cried. But it was all for naught. Hillary was taken to the Pennsylvania Child Care Detention Facility. Laureen didn't know what to do, so she reached out to a place called the Juvenile Law Center in Philadelphia, and that's when she spoke to Marcia Levick and asked for help. After hearing what must have sounded like an insane outcome, Marcia decided to take the case. And when she looked into Hillary's matter, she noticed something strange. Judge Chiavarella was the same judge who sentenced Eric, the joyriding 12-year-old, and Joel, the cheerleading credit card stealer. And when she dug deeper, the picture looked even worse. The number of children being put into custody in Judge Chiavarella's courtroom was almost 3 times higher than any other. And the offenses were minuscule. One child was sent to detention for shoplifting a $4 bottle of nutmeg. Is spice theft a jailable offense these days? What Marcia didn't know at the time was that she didn't stumble upon some coincidence. And the judge's actions weren't a reflection of his feelings about criminal justice. They were a result of his financial greed. The deal that lawyer-turned-prison builder Justin Collins made with Judge Chiavarella and Judge Conahan was that he would give them cash payments for every juvenile they sent to the Pennsylvania Child Care Facility. Basically, Collins was sending kickbacks to the judges in return for inmates. juvenile inmates, children. It would forever be known as the Cash for Kids scandal, and it went on for years. It appears, however, that Judge Chiavarella was not content to shake down only the lawyer-turned-prison builder. He was also continuing to be visited by his friend, developer Richard Brighton. Brighton said that he visited Chiavarella in his courthouse office, apparently to thank him. Brighton believed that he never would have had the opportunity to build the Pennsylvania child care facility without the judge's help. And since it's standard in the real estate development world to pay referral fees to individuals who put deals together, Brighton gave Chiavarella another $1 million referral fee, which Judge Chiavarella split with Judge Conahan. Brighton then told his close friend, "If anyone deserves it, it's you." And according to Brighton, Chiavarella replied, "I agree." Hundreds of the judge's victims ended up in the Pennsylvania child care detention facility. And while those kids were suffering in a for-profit prison in Luzerne County, Pennsylvania, Judges Chiavarella and Conahan were lounging in a luxury condo they bought in Jupiter, Florida. That's right, the judges used their finder's fee and the subsequent payoffs to buy a $750,000 condo in a high-end complex next to a marina. A marina where, every once in a while, you'd find a yacht parked in slip number 50, named the Real Justice. Lawyer Marcia Levick didn't know all of that, but she knew something smelled fishy, and that's why she turned everything she found over to the FBI. What Marcia Levick didn't know is that the federal authorities were already looking at the judges skeptically. The reason? The mafia. Judge Conahan had a standing breakfast date with the reputed boss of a northeastern Pennsylvania mafia family named William D'Elia. D'Elia became a government informant after he was arrested on charges of witness tampering and conspiracy to launder drug money. The mafioso told the FBI that something was up with Judge Conahan, and that led them to start looking at the whole crew: Conahan, Chiavarella, Collins, and Brighton. Marcia Levick's information must have just been the icing on the cake. Eventually, the cops turned up at the door of the lawyer-turned-prison builder, Justin Collins. And when they pressed him, he told them that none of this was his fault. He claimed that Judges Chiavarella and Conahan extorted him. He said that he believed that if he didn't pay the judges, they'd stop sending kids to his facility. He also said that the judges had him hide the payoffs. Sometimes he disguised the payments as maintenance fees that were being paid for the judge's Florida condominium. Other times they'd be listed as boat slip fees for docking his yacht at the condo complex. But Collins later said that it was nonsense. It was done in order to hide the real nature of the payments. The FBI seems to have told Collins that the only way he could expect any leniency was if he helped them catch the judges. So Collins continued to participate in the operation, but when he did so, he was wearing a wire. The FBI learned that Judges Chiavarella and Conahan operated a juvenile detention revenue machine. They sent hundreds of kids to the Pennsylvania child care facility. Most of those kids never had a lawyer, never expected to be sent to jail, and had no idea how long it would be for. In Hillary Transu's case, the girl who made the MySpace page, she had lawyer and juvenile advocate Marcia Levick, who immediately filed a petition seeking her release. She was out in 3 weeks. But Eric, the 12-year-old joyrider, he was in detention for 2 years. Judge Chiavarella seems to have believed that he was under surveillance. That became clear when his friend, the developer Richard Brighton, came to visit him at his chambers. When Brighton walked in the room, he says that the judge was sitting behind his desk with the lights dimmed. The judge put his fingers to his lips to hush Brighton. It seems that he believed his office was bugged. In a James Bond sort of moment, Chiavarella took a slip of paper, wrote a message on it, and then slid it across the desk. It said, "Did you wire the latest payment? Yes or no? Circle 1. Brighton circled no, and then the two men went into a separate room to talk things over. And that's when the judge told Brighton that he thought he was being investigated by the feds. He was right. Of course, the judges denied doing anything wrong, and Judge Chiavarella insisted that he was clean. There's a video out there, I think it's a 60 Minutes episode or something like that, where a reporter confronts Chiavarella in a parking lot, and the two of them spend more time than I ever would have expected anyone to spend in a parking lot going over paperwork and talking about allegations, all while standing in front of the car. But they did it, and the judge flatly denied doing anything wrong. Every allegation that you brought up, Judge Chiavarella had an excuse for. That finder's fee, he insisted that the developer voluntarily paid it to him. What about those hearings that were so quick? Well, when he was asked about that, he said, the intake people got the information and provided the recommendations to us. That's why it was so fast. And yet, according to Marshall Levick's Juvenile Law Center, between 2003 and 2006, over 2,000 juveniles were sentenced for minor crimes like petty theft and jaywalking. Children as young as 8 years old with first-time nonviolent offenses were sent to detention. 8 years old. Those children were immediately shackled and taken away without even getting the chance to say goodbye to their families. And I'll tell you, I agree with the Juvenile Law Center, who said that there were two conspiracies going on here. The one is where they sent the kids to lockup, but the other is a conspiracy of silence. The Juvenile Law Center is right, and it absolutely baffles me. No one inside the courtroom ever said anything. All these kids are getting sent to detention. There are private lawyers in the courtroom while these cases are getting disposed of. Public defenders were there, probation officers, and nobody says a word. Okay, it wasn't their cases, but any lawyer who has even the smallest amount of experience could see that something was off. You're sitting there and you watch a child who's 10 years old get taken away for stealing nutmeg and you don't say anything? Even later? Absolutely incredible. The criminal records of all the children who appeared before Judges Chiavarella and Conahan were reviewed, and I'm pretty sure that all of them were wiped clean. 4,000 juveniles had their records expunged. But it didn't make them whole. Eric, the joyrider, had trouble adjusting back into regular society. He doesn't trust anyone. But he's one of the lucky ones. While the cases for Judges Chiavarella and Conahan were pending, several of the children had such a tough time dealing with the situation that they either OD'd or committed suicide. Richard Brighton, the developer who built the for-profit juvenile detention center, pleaded guilty for failing to report a felony after he paid more than $2 million in kickbacks to the judges. He was sentenced to 1 year in federal prison, fined $250,000, and ordered to complete 100 hours of community service. Justin Collins, the lawyer/owner of the Pennsylvania child care facility, pled guilty to failing to report a felony and being an accessory to conspiracy. He got 18 months in prison and was disbarred. Both men also faced civil liability. The developer agreed to a $17.7 million settlement with the victims, while lawyer Justin Collins settled for $4.75 million. After he was arrested and charged, Judge Chiavarella vehemently denied doing anything wrong. He insisted that the payments were legal. Despite that insistence, both Chiavarella and Conahan initially pled guilty to honest services fraud and tax evasion in a deal that called for a sentence of more than 7 years in prison. But in order to plead guilty to something, you have to admit that you did something wrong. And when the judge reviewing the plea asked these men about whether they accepted responsibility for their actions, they both said no. So the plea was rejected. Shortly thereafter, a federal grand jury returned a 48-count indictment against the judges, including racketeering, extortion, bribery, money laundering, fraud, and tax violations. Judge Chiavarella was accused of routinely depriving youth defendants of their right to counsel and ordering teenage offenders into detention even when probation officers didn't recommend it. Conahan pled guilty. He pled guilty to a single racketeering charge, and he was sentenced to 17 years in prison. Judge Chiavarella, however, went to trial. Chiavarella took the stand in his own defense and admitted to jurors that he failed to report the payments on his tax returns and that he hid them from the public, but he denied any plot to take kickbacks or extort money. He told jurors that he thought he was legally entitled to Brighton's money. He called it a finder's fee for introducing the developer to the lawyer-turned-prison builder. The judge also denied that he extorted Collins. Oh, and he tried to throw his colleague under the bus too. Chiavarella claimed that it was Judge Conahan who made the arrangement for the payoffs. And when he had to explain what they were for, he tried to claim that they were for a lease on the waterfront property in Florida. Now, if that doesn't seem to make any sense for you, you're not alone. It didn't make sense to a jury of his peers either. They found him guilty of racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy, although they did acquit him of extorting Collins. Judge Chiavarella was sentenced to 28 years in prison and was ordered to pay $1.17 million in restitution. The victims of Judges Chiavarella and Conahan sued the judges for damages in civil court as well. In 2022, some 300 of the victims were awarded over $200 million. Of course, that victory is somewhat hollow, given that the judges have no money to contribute towards that judgment. Judge Chiavarella is serving his sentence in federal prison in Kentucky. He is in his 70s, and he's scheduled to be released in 2035. And I'm going to finish by telling you something that I can't explain. In December 2024, as President Joe Biden was completing his presidency, just before he left office, he commuted the sentence of Judge Michael Conahan, one of the judges to take part in what was arguably the worst judicial scandal in United States history, where judges took kickbacks to send children to jail for years, was let out of jail 4 years early. Thank you very much, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and I hope you join me in a few weeks for another one. Oh, and to my daughter who's always listening, drive carefully, Haley.